your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this past week. Residents of a North Lethbridge neighborhood were shocked Thursday morning when police knocked on their door to tell them a body had been found in their alley. Lethbridge Police Service was on the scene between 1st and 2nd Avenue on 16th Street North and spoke to residents in the area. BCN was there to speak to witnesses who did not want to go on camera, but said police officers had knocked on their door to ask if they had noticed anything suspicious in the area overnight or in the previous days. Neighbors were also asked to avoid going on the location where the body was found while investigations were carried out. The Lethbridge Police Service has developed a new vulnerable person registry set to launch tomorrow. The new program encourages individuals and their guardians to voluntarily share information about medical conditions, preferred communication methods, sensory preferences, and other relevant information. The data collected will help police in their response to critical situations involving vulnerable people. And the city of Lethbridge is experiencing a rise in encampments this winter compared to around the same time the year prior. The encampment response team presented a report to City Council this week that highlighted that 124 encampments were identified throughout November and December of 2024. That is a 195% increase from those months in 2023, which saw the team identify just 42 encampments. Most encampments locations have also seen a great shift near shelters. The encampment response team was established in early 2023. Since then, a large spike of encampments was found over the summer of 2024, and November saw the highest number of confirmed sites since comparable data was tracked in July of 2023. The good news in the report states the outreach team was successful in individuals willing to engage and saw outreach referrals rise to 60% from 41% previously. And as of Friday morning, close to $95,000 has been raised in a GoFundMe in support of a Lethbridge family whose children were struck by a vehicle on their way to school on January 20th. The organizer of the fundraiser posted an update on social media saying one of the children has been released from hospital and is recovering with friends and family. Further injuries were discovered on another child, and she is scheduled for another MRI due to the findings. Doctors say she is facing a 6 to 12-month minimum recovery timeline, and the third child is receiving assistance from medical staff with sitting, standing, and walking. BCN's Landon Hickok was on the scene shortly after the incident and filed this report on Monday morning.
Now, the details have been very vague, but the three children were rushed to the Chinook Regional Hospital by EMS and were transferred to Calgary for extended treatment. The driver of the vehicle that struck them remained on scene, and police say that charges are currently pending. Lethbridge police say that the investigation is still ongoing and charges will be pending for the driver of the incident.
Newly elected MLA for Lethbridge West, Rob Miyashiro, was sworn into the legislature Monday after winning the Lethbridge West by-election in December. Miyashiro will now serve the NDP caucus in his new role as senior advisor for the nonprofit sector. Miyashiro spoke with BCN what it was like being introduced to the legislature for the first time.
You know, I'm more excited about it now almost than I was kind of nonchalant before, thinking, oh, this will be over in a few minutes, and then we can just meet with friends and family and caucus. And when the lieutenant governor is speaking directly to me and my family, and the speaker is speaking directly to me and my family about the responsibilities and about the journey we're embarking on, it was very special and almost overwhelming to me. At one point, I realized, this is for me, and because the other MLAs, when they get sworn in en masse, it's not the same kind of intimate gathering. So yeah, very fortunate to be able to experience that. Excited about being up in Edmonton. A little bittersweet about leaving my position at LSEO, but very excited to get started in my role.
In related news, Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi was officially nominated as the NDP's candidate for the Edmonton-Strathcona riding after former Premier Rachel Notley officially stepped down as MLA on December the 30th. Now that it's official who's running to replace Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, we give you the names of those leadership hopefuls and hear from some of them on what their campaign promises are. That's next. Well, the names are confirmed. The federal Liberal caucus met Thursday on Parliament Hill as the party searches for its next leader. Candidates who want to run to replace Justin Trudeau as party leader had to have confirmed their bids by 5 p.m. Eastern Time that day and pay a $50,000 deposit. The full amount to run in the race is $350,000 to be paid in installments. Liberal House Leader Karina Gould and Nova Scotia MP Jamie Battiste have submitted their paperwork. They joined former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, and Ottawa MP Chandra Arya, who submitted their documents on Wednesday. Carney has already secured the endorsements of 4 more current and former cabinet ministers. He says Canada needs a carbon policy that works for everyone.
You know, when you look at something like carbon pricing, where it goes to the heart of, it's first and foremost, it's making this economy more competitive, more sustainable jobs. It's helping us do our bit on climate change. It's also making sure that Canadians come out ahead right now and then in the future. And what you're going to see from my campaign, my group, working with people like Stephen and many others across this country, across the party, is a solution that works for everyone, addresses all those aspects.
Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has called for 4 Liberal leadership debates. In an open letter to the other candidates, she says 2 of the debates would be in English and the other 2 in French, and they should be held as soon as possible. Concerning her own campaign, Freeland said that if elected, she would scrap changes to the capital gains tax that she introduced as finance minister. Freeland originally defended the changes to the inclusion rate, saying that they were meant to address issues of tax fairness. She also told the media on Thursday that should she become the Liberal leader, she would propose to put in place a mechanism for the party to turf unpopular leaders in the future.
We can never again be in a position where the leader is the only person who decides who the leader is. And I think Liberal Party grassroots members and caucus need to have a greater say in what we do and how we do it.
Meantime, Karina Gould has made a campaign promise to make the GST holiday permanent for certain items. The Liberal leadership candidate says essentials like children's clothes, food, and diapers should be tax exempt. She stated, however, that other items in the current tax holiday should be restored to taxable status.
Because I'm not sure that we need a permanent GST cut on Christmas trees and Hanukkah bushes, by the way. I don't actually know that many people that have Hanukkah bushes. But what I can say is that on these, what I can say is that for parents, you got to buy diapers, you got to buy food, you got to buy children's clothing, and those are big expenses for people, and that's why I would make that permanent.
Nova Scotia Liberal MP Jamie Battiste made his announcement that he is seeking to replace Justin Trudeau. Battiste, who is the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, announced his bid on Thursday as the first ever Indigenous person to run for the Prime Minister's seat.
Over the past several days, many have asked me why. I've often said it's because I was urged by Indigenous leaders from across Canada. But I've given it some reflection and you know, I believe in our Liberal policies. I believe in the National Food Program. I believe in affordable childcare. I believe in dental care. I believe in pharmacare because I believe Canadians truly care. These policies, these supports for Canadians all across our country, if the Conservatives come in, are all in jeopardy. However, in a lot of parts of our country, these have not been completed. And I believe we have unfinished business for a shared dream for our country.
In other news, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms says Chief Justice Paul Crampton granted a motion for an expedited hearing in the legal challenge to the Prime Minister's decision to prorogue Parliament until March 24th. Lawyers acting on behalf of David McKinnon and Eris Lavranos of Nova Scotia filed a federal court challenge to the decision to prorogue Parliament, citing concerns about the negative impacts of that decision on democracy, the rule of law, and the ability of Parliament to, quote, respond to the grave challenge of President Trump's foreign policy. That case is scheduled to be heard February 13th and 14th. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation has released the results from their annual survey. Its aim was to hear from Canadians what their priorities are for 2025. The survey found that 91% want to reverse the capital gains tax hike, 94% want to scrap the carbon tax, 72% want to defund the CBC, 97% oppose a home equity tax, and 93% say government bureaucrats need a salary cut. When answering reporter questions, Ontario Premier Doug Ford said Alberta Premier Danielle Smith understands why Canada's political leaders need to be united in the face of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threat, and he believes the country's premiers are quote, moving her along in her position.
We had a good discussion with Premier Smith, and she understands we need to be united. And I understand that she wants to protect, her main commodity. But country comes first, over anything. And you can't throw, a tool away from the toolbox. As I said to the premiers, you can't bring a knife to a gunfight. Usually the guy with a knife loses one in a gunfight.
Premier Smith didn't agree?
Well, not right at this point, but I think we're moving her along. I understand, but make no mistake about it, we do have a united country.
For her part, Smith met Wednesday with California Congressman Scott Peters before attending the Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions reception. On Smith's Facebook page, she says, quote, "It was great to hear from members of Congress about the importance of unleashing our energy sector. Alberta is and will remain a critical partner in achieving our shared goal of North American energy dominance." Premier Smith also says Canada has a short window to highlight the trade relationship with our country and the U.S. amid President Trump's tariff threat. At a media roundtable held on Tuesday, she said our best approach is to focus on diplomacy and refrain from talk of retaliatory tariffs.
We think that we should be talking about addressing the trade deficit by how we might be able to have more cross-border trade in goods and services. The point I've been making is that if you take energy out of the mix, Canada actually buys more U.S. goods and services than the Americans buy from us, about $58 billion, according to a National Bank survey. We can always look at ways we could buy more, whether it's military equipment, whether it is the infrastructure for more electricity, gas turbines, transformers, or whether it's AI data center technology and other products. Number three, I think we do need to double down on border security. It's quite clear from the executive order around the southern border that the issue of illegal fentanyl and gangs and migrants is top of mind for this presidency, and we want to make sure that Canada is seen to be a partner in border security. I think there's been some good measures that have been announced, and we have to execute on those.
Earlier this week, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau gave his fullest response to Donald Trump's looming threat of tariffs. He is threatening a dollar-for-dollar retaliation on tariffs. What exactly did he have to say? Hear what our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley told BCN's Jeanette Rocher.
He wouldn't get into specifics. He would simply say all options are on the table. And of course, we know that Premier Danielle Smith thinks that oil should be off the table. There is a good chance that Trump still tariffs oil, and then we don't have to think about export controls or export taxation on Canadian oil headed to the U.S. He'll put the tariff on. So Trudeau has not been out there that much in responding to this. He's at a cabinet retreat in Montebello, Quebec. It's about an hour's out drive from Ottawa on the Quebec side of the Ottawa River. and he came out, he sounded serious. He seemed like he was saying some of the right things. But I'm not sure that retaliation is the wisest move, and I'm not sure that it's going to help in the long term, because the impact of our exports to the U.S. on our economy is far bigger than the impact of their exports to Canada. It's several times greater in magnitude, more important to our economy than their exports to us are important to their economy.
Yeah, no, exactly. In the meantime, where is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on this issue, Brian?
He's touring in Quebec, and he was doing a number of radio and TV interviews in French in the Three Rivers area. He's recently put out a statement on this. He's calling for Trudeau to recall Parliament to deal with this, and he points out that the government's announced a more than $1 billion border package that hasn't been voted on by Parliament. It needs a vote in Parliament before you can act. We need to talk about retaliatory tariffs. So he's coming on board in saying that we need retaliatory tariffs, but also saying that Parliament needs to have a say on fixing the border, which is the irritant that Trump raised when he first brought this up. I'm not sure if that's what Trump's end goal is anymore, or if it's just tariffs for tariff's sake, or trying to force us into becoming the 51st state. But Poilievre is saying we need to act on the border. We need to recall Parliament. We need MPs having a say in this, and not just letting. What did he say? He said the Liberals have put their party first and shut down Parliament so they can have a leadership race in the middle of this crisis. I mean, when you think about it, it's absolutely insane that this is going on. I keep saying we need leadership in Ottawa. Instead, we got a Liberal leadership race in Ottawa.
Yeah, it is a crisis. You are right about that. So, Brian, what is Canada's answer then? I understand that there's a poll out with some suggestions.
Yeah, 82% of Canadians do believe in retaliatory tariffs, and it's an understandable emotional response. And I'm sitting on the fourth floor of the Ontario legislature here at Queen's Park, and Premier Ford is 2 floors below me. And he has been calling for an aggressive dollar for dollar retaliation. He's even said that Ontario's liquor, this is above and beyond tariffs. He said that if the tariffs come, he has ordered the LCBO, Ontario's government-owned liquor store and wholesaler, so it supplies every restaurant and bar in the province. He's ordered them to take every drop of American booze off the shelves.
That same poll that we were talking about a moment ago with the 82%, it also shows that at least 3/4 of Canadians want an immediate election to give the next government a strong mandate to deal with Trump's threats, right?
Yeah. 77% say there should be an election now, that we need a government with a strong mandate, which makes sense. I mean, Trump has made fun of the fact that Trudeau is leaving. Elon Musk, who is seemingly by Trump's side all the time, replied to a post that Musk replied to a post that Trudeau made saying, doesn't matter, you're not the governor of Canada anymore. Needling him a little bit with the term that Trump has used for him. They know that he's leaving. They know that he is a lame duck, that he has no power. So why would they deal with him? And Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, the 2 frontrunners for the Liberals, if they become prime minister, they don't have a mandate either.
You were writing over the weekend that Trump's threats towards Canada have united us in some ways, but also exposed some deep divisions in Canada. Of course, you were talking about Alberta and the backlash over the stance taken by Premier Danielle Smith.
Yeah, look, you've got an awful lot of Canadians talking about how proud they are of our country, including some who just before this we're still talking about us being a genocidal state based upon racism and white supremacy, and talking down the country at every turn. Now they're all wrapping themselves in the flag. So there's an outburst of patriotism, because I don't think most Canadians want this country to become part of the USA. But so that's the good side. Donald Trump has Canadians being patriotic again. I didn't have that on my bingo card, but there we are. But at the same time, there is this deep divide in along the East-West split. I can't believe some of my colleagues in the media business calling Danielle Smith a traitor. I know Rick Bell at the Calgary Sun, he's been writing in defense of her, and so have I. I can understand her position. I can understand Doug Ford's position. They're each looking after their own constituency, calling them traitors, constantly talking down a large part of the country. I mean, do these folks not travel to Calgary? Do they not go to Lethbridge? Do they not visit Saskatoon?
Probably
Straight
not.
across Saskatoon and Alberta, I've been, well, I do. And I've been hearing from people who are talking about how angry they are. Some of them, they don't like the retaliation argument. They side with Premier Smith. Others simply don't like the way that Alberta is being used. I mean, the Trudeau government has abused your biggest industry for nearly a decade and tried to shut it down. And just recently with the emissions caps, which are production caps, is an attempt to hobble Canada's oil industry.
Donald Trump's tariff threat continues to generate reactions among Canadian political experts. Lars Hallström, professor of political science at the University of Lethbridge, explains what would happen if Trump followed through on that threat, especially in the economic area in southern Alberta.
Albertans, of course, are worried about the primacy of oil and gas as a revenue stream for the province. If we see declining revenues, that's going to trigger probably a deficit budget for us. So, of course, it makes sense to prioritize the Albertan interest and the Albertan industrial interest, even if it means not necessarily playing in full kit with Team Canada. Let's remember, Donald Trump is a bit unpredictable in terms of what he actually does. He says a lot, he's signed a lot, but we don't actually know where things will play out, including some of the constitutionality and some of the legality of his own actions. So I think the sense of the premiers is largely we need to play as a country. Alberta has a lot of skin in a slightly different game, as do a few of the other provinces. And so we'll want to see how that balance of diplomacy, the art of the deal, which is playing to Donald Trump's particular oeuvre and book, as opposed to do we stand up, and I don't like the language of stand strong, but do we sort of draw the line in the sand around how we're going to respond to those tariffs as a national economy?
The tariff is 25% on everything imported to the U.S. from Canada and could be coming in on February the 1st. Premier Danielle Smith is blaming Prime Minister Trudeau for the 25% U.S. tariffs headed our way. As previously stated, Smith says diplomacy is the way to go, not retaliatory tariffs. BCN's Paul Arthur sat down with our legislative reporter and the National Post's Alberta correspondent Tyler Dawson to hear his thoughts, diplomacy or retaliation.
It seems like it's going to have to be both at some point. Okay. There seems to be a large ranging consensus that there's going to need to be some sort of retaliation at some point if there are tariffs brought into effect. To give one example, Mark Carney, the Liberal leadership candidate, Edmonton boy, as it happens, grew up here, although it was born actually in the Northwest Territories. He said that retaliatory tariffs should be used to raise money to then support Canadian workers. So that's just one example of how those tariffs could potentially be used here. Now, Danielle Smith, as we've talked about on the program before, has been on this real charm offensive in the United States, going back to mid-November, late November, I think, was when she first met with all the Western governors in the U.S. She was at Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago. She's been in Washington for the past several days, meeting with folks in the Capitol, and was supposed to attend the inauguration, but of course then it moved inside. So she was one of the unlucky ones, I think, that didn't get into the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol building. But what's interesting is that Smith has sort of conceded that there's going to need to be some sort of retaliation, but is still really, really pushing on diplomacy. She's saying, look, we didn't get the day one tariffs. February 1st seems to be the date that Trump is now mulling around. We have this reprieve. We should really be talking about the benefits of free trade, how it enriches both Canadians and Americans, and try and reach some other solution. She's really shied away from retaliatory tariffs, especially on Alberta energy exports. And the reason I find that interesting is because she's very, very offside with almost every other political leader in the country. Pierre Poilievre has talked about how there needs to be retaliatory tariffs. The Prime Minister and the people around him have talked about it. The Liberal leadership candidates have talked about it. All the other premiers are on board with some sort of United Canada response. The only allies she's actually got on especially on the Alberta energy front, is the Bloc Québécois, actually, who have spoken out with her and said there should not be surtaxes or something on Alberta energy. So a really interesting situation. Time's going to tell, I think, whose strategy is borne out. But Smith is putting, I think, a lot of political capital on this. And so I think it's really notable that she is very much in a different spot than other political leaders right now.
Well, isn't it fascinating? You bring up Blanchette with the Bloc Québécois. And I mean, he says it's actually absurd, to, hold back our energy, our oil and gas and so forth, which is, pretty kind of bizarre coming from Quebec, right? But he's got a good point, I think, in the sense that he's arguing that, hey, you know what? If the U.S. in the meantime finds some other countries to supply their oil and gas, then it could potentially put Canada in a pretty weak negotiating place once we want to get back on exporting oil and gas to them. They're going, hey, we've already got some. So I understand where he's coming from.
No, absolutely. There's a bunch of different things happening. I mean, a lot of our oil goes to sort of the U.S. Midwest and to the Gulf Coast, where there's all these refineries that have been built or retrofitted to process sort of Alberta heavy crude. The U.S. doesn't really produce any of that, which is why they want ours. But they can get it from elsewhere if they need to. And maybe more to the point, and the real long-term risk, if you were to bring in some sort of export ban, is that those facilities will say, well, we'll just retrofit. We'll retrofit to process American crude. And then we actually wouldn't have anywhere to sell our oil. And that, I think, is why you're also seeing Alberta politicians talk a lot about, sort of reviving Energy East or reviving Northern Gateway or finding some other sort of points of export for Alberta oil to send overseas. And there is a market.
Oh, absolutely there is, yeah. I mean, I think that would be wisdom to do, but we'd have to refine some of our federal rules, wouldn't we? So
we would, and it would not be a fast process. I mean, no one's building a pipeline to Kitimat in, the next 6 weeks or something.
Heart disease is the second leading cause of death in Canada. And in southern Alberta, there is a higher risk of dying from this disease, in part due to lack of resources. Dr. Sayi Zilke is one of only 6 cardiologists in AHS's South Zone, and she joins us after the break. And if you're watching us online, that full interview is available on our YouTube channel.